Hi, today I'm going to show you how I apply the skills I show in my 10 skills for designing a mandala video when I'm creating my own piece of art. Hi, welcome to Gray Lightning, my video blog about making things and playing games. And about a year and a half ago, I did a video called 10 Skills for Designing a Mandala. And in that video, I said, I'm already halfway through a project where I'm applying these skills. And then, like so many things in life, that project kind of got set to the side and still isn't done. And so I decided recently I really need to finish that. And so what I'm going to do is two videos. The first one is going to be about the designs and how the 10 skills are applied to do them. And then in the next video, I'm going to show using the drawings to audition colors for the designs, because you can swap all the colors out on the different layers and see what they're going to look like before you paint them, which is really important. And then the second video will also include actually cutting the pieces and all my fabrication techniques. So my application here is I have a screen porch in the house that we bought 2 years ago, where the prior owners had a big screen TV in the screen porch, and that really doesn't fit the way we watch television. So we immediately took the TV down, left a big hole, and I said, I'm going to fill that with laser cut art, and now I'm finally going to do that. So in the porch is one of my favorite rugs on the floor, and it's a paisley floral design, and I wanted to use that as my inspiration for my art. This is one of 6 panels that are in the final piece. There are 3 different designs that we'll be reviewing today, and then 2 different colorways of each design for 6 total, and then they go into one larger piece to fill the big gap that's on my wall in the screen porch. So that's what we're going to do today, is I'm going to go through the design review I just had to go through on drawings that I had done a year and a half ago to see if they all still worked, if they needed to be improved. And in fact, I did have to make some fixes on some of them, and I'll point that out. But the other thing I'm going to show you is for these 3 drawings, how those 10 skills are applied, because sometimes it's harder to see how it's done in something like this that's like a floral design as opposed to the more traditional geometric mandalas that you usually see. So I'm going to do the design review today and follow up with the color auditioning and fabrication in a second video. The first skill is to clearly understand what you're trying to achieve. You'll always have general artistic goals, and in mandalas, repetition and variety are very important. But you'll also have project-specific goals, and mine here are that I want it to go with the rug and I want it to fill the space in the wall. So I measured the opening, and then I did some back-of-the-envelope kind of calculations and decided that I would need 6 16 by 16 inch mandalas. That's what I did in the design, but when I was buying wood, the best wood I could find was just 15.5 by 15.5, so I downsized everything to 15 by 15. Before I get into the specifics of that, though, if this is helpful to you, please give me a thumbs up on the video, subscribe to my channel, and turn on notifications so you know when I post something new. I'd really appreciate it. So, the second skill is setting up the design space. I almost always use a single document for a project design. That's not only more efficient, it gets me more consistency. The bottom level has my guides on it, then the swatches. Then I have a shared background that all of them use. And then each of the 3 different flower designs are here. And each of those flower designs has 3 levels: a top, a middle, and a bottom. Let's take a look at the guide layer. So I have a horizontal and a vertical guide, and you get these by pulling them out from the rulers on the side and the top. They are in the middle, and then where they cross becomes the center of the image. And that's a very important point because it's used by rotation in many of the drawings. I want to talk a little bit about paths because I find this kind of confusing. A path is literally a path that a stroke follows. If you don't have a stroke over it, you can't see it. So in these image elements, when I move them, when I click on them and select them, you'll see a red line in the middle of them. That is the path. The gray that you're seeing is the stroke. If you look at the swatches, you'll see the path, and sometimes it's in the middle of the stroke, sometimes it's on the inside, and sometimes it's on the outside. The swatches have been created to make it easier for you to apply characteristics to a stroke. So if I select that stroke and then I get the eyedropper and I click on one of these swatches, that will take on the characteristics of that swatch. Here are how the swatches are organized. The top row are the most common settings we think we're going to use for the top layer. Then we have a set for the middle layer and then a set for the bottom layer of each of the mandalas. Each swatch is given the color you want to use on that layer, and the thickness is based on what you think is going to be the most common thickness. So the top layer has the thinnest strokes, then the middle layer is about double that, and then the bottom layer is 3 times the size of the top layer stroke. The third characteristic captured by the swatch is the alignment. So the first one is centered on, the stroke is centered on the path. The middle one, the stroke is to the inside of the path. And the third, the stroke is to the outside of the path. A good default is having it in the middle, but for each element in your design, you're going to end up deciding, do I want the stroke to be in the middle or inside or outside? As for the weight or the thickness of the lines, these swatches are really just the most common things that you think you're going to use. The fact is, in this layer right here, I have the expected thicker line, but down here in the leaves, I'm using a thinner line, and in the bars on the outside, I'm using the thinnest line. So it's really not a rule, it's just a productivity tool. The third skill is learning how to use basic shapes, and that's primarily ellipses and rectangles, but I suppose you could also throw lines in, even though they're not a shape technically. Every layer has at least one rectangle on it, and that's the outside frame, and the stroke here is always aligned to the inside of the path. As the stroke on that rectangle keeps getting fatter, you can see how you get those layers that are customary for mandalas. Ellipses are very common. This petal here used the direct selection tool to select that top and make it pointed. These little elements here are all little ellipses. And even this corner element here, it's a circle that's then, using Pathfinder, cut by the outer frame into just a quarter circle. Your biggest efficiency tools are rotation and reflection. Often you draw something once, like this petal here in the middle, and then use the rotation tool to rotate, in this case around the center of that center point that we created, and at 30-degree increments you keep copying and pasting that in a very automatic fashion. You do the same thing with those little elements there, all rotating around the center of the image. This flower, however, uses very little rotation. Only these 2 corner elements were drawn once and then duplicated at 90-degree rotations. If I were to try to create these little ellipses here and rotate them, the center would not be around the center of the document. It would have to be down here somewhere below the center, and you'd have to reestablish that as its rotation point. The really heavy lift tool here is reflection, and so you'll have elements like this center one, which is unique, but all those other petals, they're drawn on one side and reflected to the other side. The same is true of the mid-range set of petals. One is unique, and then the others are created once and reflected. The same with the leaves on the bottom. The vertical lines were also reflected. This flower here is also almost all reflected elements. These outside lines have been created on one side and reflected and joined. All these little circles and lines in the middle were created once and then reflected, and of course the leaves and the vertical lines that you see in the outside edge. You'll see in a bit why these lines are important and also why some of them are different colors from the others. This particular flower is a really good example of the importance of learning to use the pen tool. All mandalas start at the top layer, so let's look at the top layer of this flower. I'll unlock it so that I can select it and you can see the paths. So this was drawn using the pen tool. Some of the curves are smooth and some of them are pointed by design, and you do those using the direct selection tool. Same is true of this inside layer. It was also done using the pen tool. You do it on one side, you reflect it, and then you join it at the top and the bottom. The leaves are also, all the leaves that you've seen here have been drawn with the pen tool. So you take a lot of time drawing all these layers, but eventually you have to go back and connect each layer, so each layer is only one piece. That's the basic thing you're going for. Every layer only one piece, and every layer is strong enough for assembly. On your first pass, you're drawing the elements. You're drawing the flower, in this case, the petals and the leaves and the stem, but eventually you have to go back and say, how do I connect this to the outside frame? Because the frame is how you're going to line everything up when you assemble it. So you not only have to connect things back to the frame, but you also have to look at how strong those connections are. For example, this center section here has very small connections here to the petals, but it's firmly connected at the base through the leaves to the frame. Here's the middle layer. The central section's got a very strong structure. There's only 2 lines, though, that are going back to the corners. And because there's no line over that in the top layer, it shows up as a different color, which is also a design decision you're making. Let's look at the bottom layer. This one's very strong, really. It's got good connections everywhere. On this flower, you can see how I'm going to use these lines to support the internal flower structure. They touch the leaves and they touch the flower structure. Now, because I'm using a fatter, heavier stroke, this flower is actually bigger than the flower above it, and it needs a separate support system. So I'm going to put in a different set of lines, and they will be a different color because they don't get covered up by the top. And then the same is true with the third layer. I'm going to put in yet another set of lines, now closer to the outer edge for a bigger flower, and they are going to show up as a different color in the final assembly. When I did my review, I went ahead and reinforced in the middle layer here these points. They just weren't strong enough connections to support that center. It would have literally just fallen out when I laser cut it. So I actually did that in the cut files. This flower I know works because it's the one that I've got as my demo piece here in this video. But you can see how I have similar support lines also here at the tips of the leaves. And then when I look at the middle layer here, you can see I've got support lines, but I did not make them heavier. I made them the same weight as the top, and therefore they disappear, except at the very little bottom edge there is going to be peeking out. Let's look at the bottom layer alone. You see, you need to look at them both in context with the other layers and standalone for connection. I have connecting lines here, but they are thin. The ones on the leaves will disappear. When you're satisfied with the drawings, then you can convert them for cutting. And always keep your original drawing safe and separate. Make copies, and actually I recommend making 2 copies. So you can go in Illustrator and say save a copy, and I saved one for using in the color audition process, and then a different one that I said is for cut files, because I'm going to be modifying that, and it's no going back from the modifications you're making. Let's open that file, and one layer at a time you select it. You go to Object, Path, Outline, Strokes, and now you get shapes, and you see all the overlaps in the shape. You've still got it all selected. You open up Pathfinder and you say Unite, and it turns it into one seamless shape. Then turn off the fill color and then set the line to, in my case, RGB red. That's what I use for cut lines. And this is ready to cut. I would go ahead right away and just say File, Export, and then save it as an SVG for the laser cutter. Use a good naming convention because, each flower is 3 layers, so that's 9 files I'm managing. In the next video, I'll show you how to create a palette, color audition, so you can see the impact of color changes, and how to cut and assemble. If that's interesting to you, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you know when that video comes out.